The Galactic Unity Academy floated in the endless darkness of space. A massive structure of metal and glass orbiting a neutral moon that belonged to no empire and served all species equally. And it was here that the finest military cadets from across the known galaxy came to prove themselves worthy of command. Danny Carter stood at the observation window of the transport shuttle, watching the academy grow larger as they approached. And he could not help but yawn at the sight that made every other passenger gasp with wonder or tremble. With anxiety, he was 24 years old. Average height, with messy brown hair and tired eyes that suggested he had not slept well during the journey. And he was also the first human ever admitted to this prestigious institution. A fact that seemed to concern everyone except Danny himself. "You are the human," a voice said from behind him. And Danny turned to find a tall reptilian creature covered in green scales staring down at him with obvious curiosity. "That is me," Danny replied with a casual shrug. "And you are?" "I am called Zin," the reptilian said. "I am Sarati, and I have heard many strange things about your species since the announcement of your admission." Danny smiled and stretched his arms above his head, his joints popping quietly as he did so. And he asked what kind of strange things Zin had heard. "They say your planet is a death world," Zin answered with what might have been concern in his voice. "A place of extreme temperatures, toxic atmosphere, aggressive wildlife, and constant natural disasters. And yet your people not only survived but thrived there. Earth is home," Danny said simply. "I never really thought of it as that dangerous, but I guess everything is relative." Zin stared at the human for a long moment before making a sound that Danny would later learn was nervous laughter among the Sarati people. The shuttle docked at the Academy's main port, and the cadets filed out into a massive hall where dozens of species mingled together in their various uniforms. And Danny noticed immediately that he was receiving more attention than anyone else. An insectoid creature nearly 8 feet tall approached the group of new arrivals, its compound eyes reflecting the bright lights of the hall, and its mandibles clicked together as it spoke in a voice that was surprisingly smooth and clear. "I am Instructor Veltrix," the creature announced, "and I will be overseeing your survival training during your time at this academy. So listen carefully, because I do not repeat myself." Danny listened as Veltrix explained the Academy's expectations, the rigorous training schedule, and the various tests that cadets would face during their first year. And he found his attention wandering as the speech continued. "The most important evaluation you will face," Veltrix said with emphasis, "is the survival instinct test, which takes place at the end of your first month here. And I warn you now that many cadets fail this test. Some of them permanently." A ripple of fear passed through the gathered cadets. But Danny simply scratched the back of his head and wondered where his quarters were located after the orientation. Zin approached Danny again as they walked through the Academy's winding corridors toward the dormitory section. "You do not seem concerned about anything," Zin observed. "And I am not sure if that makes you brave or foolish. Probably a bit of both," Danny admitted with a grin. "But I figure there is no point worrying about things until they actually happen." Zin made that nervous laughing sound again and told Danny that he hoped they would be assigned to the same training unit, because the human was unlike anyone he had ever met. They parted ways at the dormitory junction, and Danny found his quarters easily enough. A small but comfortable room with a bed that looked surprisingly inviting after the long journey. Was about to lie down when his door chimed, and he opened it to find a human woman in a formal uniform standing in the hallway with an expression of barely contained frustration on her face. "Danny Carter," she said. "I am Myra Hollins, the human liaison officer stationed at this academy, and I need to speak with you immediately." Danny invited her in and offered her the only chair in the room while he sat on the edge of his bed and waited for whatever lecture was coming. "Do you understand what your presence here means?" Myra asked, her voice tight with stress. "You are the first human to ever attend this academy. And everything you do reflects on our entire species." "I understand," Danny said, though his relaxed posture suggested otherwise. "The other species already think humans are primitive," Myra continued. "They accepted you only because Earth's government pushed hard for representation. And there are many here who expect you to fail." Danny nodded slowly and asked what exactly she wanted him to do about that. "I want you to take this seriously," Myra said, leaning forward in her chair. "I want you to train harder than everyone else. Study longer than everyone else, and prove that humans belong among the stars." "I will do my best," Danny promised. And something in his calm tone made Myra pause. She studied him for a moment, looking for any sign of the determination she hoped to inspire. But all she saw was a tired young man who seemed more interested in sleeping than in galactic politics. "The survival test," she said finally, "is designed to push cadets to their absolute limits. And it will target your specific species' weaknesses. So whatever you think you know about survival, forget it. Because this will be unlike anything Earth could prepare you for." Danny thanked her for the warning and assured her that he would be ready when the time came. Myra left his quarters with a heavy sigh, already composing her report to Earth Command about the seemingly unmotivated representative they had sent to the most important academy in the galaxy as soon as she was gone. Danny lay back on his bed and stared at the ceiling, thinking about everything he had heard since arriving. The other species feared humans because of Earth's harsh conditions, and they expected him to be some kind of super soldier. But Danny knew that he was just an ordinary person who had grown up on an ordinary farm in an ordinary part of America. He closed his eyes and let himself drift towards sleep, because whatever challenges waited for him at this academy, he knew he would face them better after a good rest in the monitoring station 3 levels above the dormitories. Instructor Veltrix reviewed the new cadet profiles with growing irritation. The human shows no elevated stress hormones, one of the technicians reported. His vital signs suggest he is already asleep. Veltrix's mandibles clicked in disapproval, and the instructor wondered if accepting a human into the academy had been a mistake. But the test would reveal the truth, as it always did. And Veltrix was certain that this unremarkable human would fail like so many others before him. The galaxy was harsh and unforgiving, and survival required constant vigilance, something the sleeping human clearly did not possess. The month passed quickly at the Galactic Unity Academy, filled with physical training, tactical lessons, and countless exercises designed to push cadets beyond their limits. And through it all, Danny Carter maintained his reputation as the most relaxed student anyone had ever seen. He passed his classes with acceptable scores, never excelling but never failing. And he made friends easily despite the initial suspicion many species showed toward Humantian became his closest companion. And the Serati often watched Danny with a mixture of confusion and admiration as the human approached every challenge with the same calm attitude. "Tomorrow is the survival test," Zin said as they ate dinner in the Academy's massive cafeteria, surrounded by dozens of alien species. "And I am terrified." Danny chewed his food slowly and asked why Zin was so worried. "Because cadets die in this test," Zin whispered, leaning closer so others would not hear. "Not often, but it happens. And even those who survive are sometimes changed forever by what they experience." Danny considered this information while finishing his meal, and then he shrugged and said that worrying about it would not change anything. "How can you be so calm?" Zin demanded, his scales flushing a darker shade of green. "Do you not understand what we are facing?" "I understand," Danny replied, "but I have learned that fear uses up energy, and I would rather save my energy for when I actually need it." Zin shook his head and wondered again if humans were brave or simply incapable of understanding danger the next morning. All first-year cadets gathered in the massive biodome at the center of the academy, a structure so large that it contained entire ecosystems and could simulate almost any planetary environment. Instructor Veltrix stood on a raised platform, compound eyes sweeping across the nervous crowd of young soldiers. And when the instructor spoke, every cadet listened. The survival instinct test will last exactly 72 hours, Veltrix announced. And during that time, you will face escalating threats designed to trigger your species-specific survival responses. Danny noticed several cadets trembling, their various appendages shaking with fear, and he felt a small wave of sympathy for them. Each of you will enter a separate simulation chamber, Veltrix continued, where the environment will be tailored to challenge your particular biology and psychology. The instructor's gaze seemed to linger on Danny for a moment longer than the others. You will be monitored at all times, and if your life signs indicate genuine mortal danger, you will be extracted. But extraction means automatic failure. A murmur passed through the crowd, and Danny heard several cadets whispering prayers to gods he had never heard of. The test begins now, Veltrix declared. Proceed to your assigned chambers. Danny found his chamber easily. A large pod marked with human biological specifications and the number 47. And he stepped inside without hesitation. The door sealed behind him with a hiss. And for a moment everything was dark and silent. Then the simulation activated, and Danny found himself standing in a dense forest at night, with towering trees blocking out all but a few scattered stars above. The temperature dropped rapidly, and Danny could see his breath forming clouds in the cold air. And somewhere in the darkness he heard sounds that were definitely not friendly. He took a moment to assess his situation, looking around at the environment and noting the terrain, the available resources, and the potential threats. Other cadets in their own chambers were already panicking, their vital signs spiking as predator sounds echoed through their simulations. And the monitoring station buzzed with activity as technicians tracked dozens of stress responses. Danny walked calmly through the forest, his eyes adjusting to the darkness, until he found a large tree with massive roots that created a natural shelter. This will do, he said quietly to himself. And he began gathering fallen leaves and soft vegetation from the surrounding area in the monitoring station. Instructor Veltrix watched the human's chamber with growing confusion. What is he doing? One of the technicians asked, studying Danny's strange behavior. It appears he is building some kind of nest, another technician replied. Equally puzzled, Danny piled the leaves and vegetation into the space between the roots, creating a thick insulating layer that would protect him from the cold ground. And then he crawled inside and made himself comfortable. Is this a human survival technique? Veltrix asked Myra Hollins, who had been called to the monitoring station to provide insight. Myra watched the screen with wide eyes and admitted that she had no idea what Danny was doing within the simulation. The temperature continued to drop, and predator sounds grew closer. But Danny simply adjusted his position in his makeshift bed and closed his eyes. He's going to sleep, a technician announced with disbelief. His vital signs are slowing, and brain activity indicates he is entering a rest state. Veltrix's mandibles clicked rapidly in agitation, and the instructor demanded to know if the human had given up already. It has only been 47 minutes, another technician reported. No cadet has ever stopped trying so quickly. Myra stared at the screen showing Danny's peaceful face, and she felt her hopes for human representation dying with every second that passed. Should we extract him? A technician, Asket Veltrix, considered the question, compound eyes fixed on the sleeping human, but ultimately decided to let the simulation continue. He has not failed yet, the instructor said. I'm curious to see what happens when the threats reach his location. In chambers throughout the biodome, other cadets were fighting for their lives, using every skill they had learned to survive the escalating dangers of their simulations and battled against the cold of his own environment, his reptilian blood struggling to maintain body heat. And he wondered if his strange human friend was faring any better. None of them could have imagined that Danny was sleeping peacefully while the galaxy's most dangerous survival test raged around him. The first hour ended, and Danny did not wake up. The second hour brought new threats. And still Danny slept, and in the monitoring station, Instructor Veltrix began to wonder if perhaps they had all underestimated what it meant to be born on a death world. 12 hours had passed since the survival test began, and the monitoring station had become increasingly focused on a single chamber. Danny Carter was still asleep. Instructor Veltrix stood before the main display screen, compound eyes never leaving the image of the peaceful human. While technicians scrambled to understand what they were witnessing, the simulation has sent 3 predator encounters to his location, a technician reported, and he has not woken for any of them. Myra Hollins paced behind the observation consoles, her hands clasped tightly behind her back, and she could not decide if she should be horrified or amazed. "Show me the recordings," Veltrix commanded, and the screen shifted to display the previous encounters. The first predator had been a large feline creature, designed to trigger the human fear response associated with ancestral threats. And it had approached Danny's shelter with deadly silence. Every other species would have sensed the danger and responded with fight or flight. But Danny had simply continued sleeping. "Watch closely," a technician said, pointing at the screen as the simulated predator drew near. Something strange happened. Danny shifted in his sleep, rolling slightly to face the approaching threat, and his breathing pattern changed almost imperceptibly. The predator froze, its simulated instincts detecting something wrong. And after a long moment of hesitation, it turned and retreated into the darkness. "What did we just see?" Veltrix demanded. Mira leaned forward, studying the biometric data that scrolled alongside the video. And she noticed something extraordinary. His heart rate increased by only 4 beats per minute, she said slowly, and his body released a small amount of adrenaline. But he never reached conscious awareness. "That is impossible," Veltrix insisted. "Survival responses require conscious decision-making, not for humans," Mira replied. And suddenly she understood what was happening. "We evolved on a planet where danger was constant, where predators could attack at any moment, and our bodies learned to respond to threats without waking our conscious minds." The second predator encounter played on the screen, showing a pack of smaller hunters surrounding Danny's shelter again. Danny shifted in his sleep, this time curling into a tighter ball that protected his vital organs. And his breathing became so shallow that the predators seemed confused about whether he was even alive. They eventually lost interest and moved on, and Danny's vitals returned to normal rest levels. "This is remarkable," a technician whispered. "His body is running survival protocols automatically." Veltrix watched the third encounter, which featured a large simulated bear-like creature that should have triggered an immediate awakening response. Danny opened his eyes for exactly 3 seconds, looked at the creature with an expression of mild annoyance, then closed his eyes and went back to sleep. The bear hesitated, confused by the complete lack of fear, and eventually wandered away. Did he just intimidate a predator while half asleep? A technician asked in disbelief. Myra nodded slowly, finally understanding what made humans different from every other species in the galaxy. On Earth, showing fear to a predator often makes things worse, she explained. So humans developed the ability to suppress fear responses. And apparently that works even when we are not fully conscious. The simulation continued to escalate, throwing new challenges at the sleeping human. A storm rolled through the forest, bringing heavy rain and the threat of flooding. And the technicians watched with fascination as Danny repositioned himself in his sleep to avoid the water collecting around his shelter. He did not wake up. But his body knew exactly what to do. His unconscious mind is processing environmental data, a technician reported. Temperature changes, sounds, vibrations. Everything is being analyzed without conscious awareness. Toxic spores released from nearby plants. A scenario designed to test a cadet's ability to recognize and avoid environmental hazards. Danny's breathing automatically became shallower, reducing his intake of the harmful particles. And he turned his face away from the direction of the spore cloud. He is not even trying, Veltrix said. And for the first time, there was something like respect in the instructor's voice. In the observation deck above the monitoring station, other cadets who had already failed watched the screens with growing amazement. Sin was among them, having been extracted after nearly succumbing to hypothermia in his own simulation. And the Serati stared at Danny's sleeping form with newfound terror. He told me that fear wastes energy, Zin said to no one in particular. And I thought he was joking 24 hours into the test. Danny had avoided every lethal scenario without ever fully waking up. His body had maintained optimal temperature through careful positioning. His breathing had adapted to every atmospheric threat, and his subtle movements had discouraged every predator that approached. I need to report this to the Academy Council, Veltrix said finally, because I do not think we understood what we were inviting into this institution. Myra watched Danny sleep, and she felt a strange pride mixing with her earlier frustration. She had come to the Academy expecting to babysit a disappointing representative of humanity. But instead, she was witnessing something that would change how the galaxy viewed her species forever. The test was only 1/3 complete. And already Danny Carter had accomplished something no other cadet had ever done. He had proven that humans were never truly vulnerable, not even when they appeared to be completely helpless. And somewhere in his simulated forest, Danny dreamed peaceful dreams while his ancient survival instincts kept him alive. 48 hours had passed, and the survival test entered its final and most dangerous phase. The monitoring station was now crowded with observers. As word had spread throughout the Academy about the human who was sleeping through the most difficult evaluation in galactic military history, instructor Veltrix stood at the center of the chaos, trying to maintain order while also watching Danny's chamber with increasing fascination. Initiate maximum threat protocol, Veltrix commanded, and the technicians hesitated before obeying. Are you certain? One of them asked. Maximum protocol is designed to force conscious survival decisions, and it has caused permanent psychological damage to cadets in the past. The human has passed every other test unconsciously, Veltrix replied, and I need to know if there is any limit to this ability. The simulation around Danny transformed dramatically. The gentle forest became a nightmare landscape of fire and destruction, with multiple predators converging on his position from every direction. The ground began to shake with simulated seismic activity, and the temperature swung wildly between extreme heat and freezing cold. Vital signs are changing, a technician announced. Heart rate increasing, adrenaline levels rising. Brain activity suggests he is approaching consciousness. Every observer leaned forward, waiting to see how the human would respond to a scenario designed to be impossible to sleep through. Danny opened his eyes slowly, looking around at the chaos surrounding him with an expression of sleepy confusion. A massive predator lunged toward him from the darkness, and Danny rolled out of the way with surprising speed. Though his movements still had the sluggish quality of someone who was not fully awake, he stood up, stretched his arms above his head, and yawned while fire raged in the trees behind him. Is he still half asleep? Zin asked from the observation deck, watching his friend face certain death with the attitude of someone who had been rudely awakened from a nap. Danny looked around at the chaos, scratched the back of his head, and began walking toward higher ground. He moved through the nightmare landscape with an efficiency that seemed almost accidental, stepping over obstacles without looking at them. ducking under falling branches a moment before they crashed down, and avoiding predators by simply not being where they expected him to be. "He is not fighting," Myra observed. "He is not running. He's just moving. His path is optimal," a technician confirmed with disbelief. "Every step takes him away from danger and towards safety. But he does not appear to be calculating anything." Danny reached a rocky outcrop that provided natural protection from the threats below, and he found a comfortable spot among the stones. "Quiet down," he muttered, apparently addressing the roaring simulation around him. "Some of us are trying to rest." He lay down on the rocks, closed his eyes, and went back to sleep. The monitoring station erupted in chaos, with technicians arguing about what they had just witnessed, and Instructor Veltrix clicking mandibles so rapidly that the sound filled the entire room. "That is not possible," someone shouted. "No conscious mind can simply ignore maximum threat protocol." "He was barely conscious," Myra replied, finally understanding Danny in a way she never had before. His body did all the work while his mind was still mostly asleep in chambers throughout the biodome. The final hours of the test pushed cadets to their absolute limits and had already failed, along with nearly 40% of the first-year class. And those who remained were fighting desperately to survive until the timer reached 01. Cadet from a telepathic species had suffered a complete mental breakdown and would require months of recovery. Another cadet, a silicon-based life form that was supposed to be immune to fear, had begged for extraction after only 12 hours, but Danny slept on his rocky outcrop, unbothered by the apocalypse raging around him. The final 12 hours brought every horror the simulation could generate: coordinated predator attacks, environmental collapse, psychological warfare through subliminal sound frequencies, and direct physical threats that would have killed any unprotected organism. Danny avoided all of it without ever fully waking up. He shifted position when danger approached. His breathing adapted to every atmospheric change, and his body temperature regulated itself perfectly despite the extreme conditions. When the simulation finally shut down and the lights returned to normal, Danny was curled up on his rocky bed, sleeping as peacefully as he had on his first night at the academy. An extraction team entered his chamber to retrieve him, and they found him so deeply asleep that they had difficulty waking him up. "Cadet Carter," the team leader said loudly, "the test is over. You need to come with us." Danny opened his eyes slowly, looked around at the now empty simulation chamber, and asked a question that would become legendary throughout the academy. "When does the test start?" The extraction team stared at him in stunned silence. "The test is over," the team leader repeated. "You have been in here for 72 hours. Danny sat up, rubbed his eyes, and seemed genuinely confused by this information. "I thought I just got here," he said. "I found a nice spot to rest, and then you woke me up." "You passed," the team leader said, still struggling to process what had happened. "You survived maximum threat protocol while unconscious." Danny nodded slowly, stood up, stretched his back, and asked if there was somewhere he could get breakfast. Because he was feeling a little hungry, the extraction team led him out of the chamber, and every observer in the monitoring station watched the human walk away as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Instructor Veltrix turned to Mira Hollins and spoke, words that no one had ever expected to hear. "I believe I owe humanity an apology," the instructor said, "because I do not think any of us understood what your species truly is." Mira smiled for the first time since arriving at the academy, and she finally felt hope for humanity's place among the stars. The main assembly hall of the Galactic Unity Academy was filled to capacity, with cadets from every species packed into rows of seats, while instructors and officials occupied the raised platform at the front. This was the results ceremony, the moment when first-year cadets learned whether they had passed or failed the most important test of their military careers. Danny Carter sat in the middle of the crowd, still looking slightly sleepy, despite having slept for most of the previous 3 days. And Zin sat beside him with scales that had not returned to their normal color since his own extraction. "I cannot believe you are so calm," Zin whispered. After everything that happened, Danny shrugged and said he did not feel like anything special had happened. Just a long nap in an uncomfortable place. Zin stared at his friend and wondered if humans simply did not understand the concept of danger. Instructor Veltrix stepped to the podium at the front of the hall, compound eyes sweeping across the assembled cadets. And the room fell silent immediately. "The survival instinct test has concluded," Veltrix announced. "And I will now share the results with you." A holographic display appeared above the platform, showing statistics and data that made many cadets gasp with shock. Of the 112 cadets who began this test, only 58 have passed, Veltrix continued, which is a lower pass rate than any previous year in this academy's history. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, and Danny noticed several cadets looking at him with expressions he could not quite read. "The test was made more difficult this year," Veltrix explained, "because we needed to establish a new baseline for evaluation, one that accounts for species capabilities we had not previously understood." More eyes turned toward Danny, and he shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "I will now read the names of those who passed," Veltrix said. And the list began scrolling on the display. Danny listened as alien names he could barely pronounce were called out. Each one met with cheers or sighs of relief from the crowd. Then Veltrix paused, and the instructor's voice changed slightly. "Danny Carter," Veltrix announced. "Human, passed." The hall erupted in noise, but it was not the polite applause that had greeted other names. Some cadets cheered with genuine enthusiasm, while others whispered with disbelief or fear, and the sound mixed together into a strange chaos that Danny found somewhat overwhelming. "Silence," Veltrix commanded, and the room obeyed. "I have additional comments regarding Cadet Carter's performance." Danny felt every eye in the room lock onto him, and he wished very much that he could go back to sleep. The human cadet spent approximately 93% of the test in an unconscious state, Veltrix announced, and gasps echoed through the hall. And despite this, he avoided every threat, adapted to every environmental challenge, and survived maximum threat protocol without ever making a conscious survival decision. The biometric data from Danny's test appeared on the display, showing heart rate, brain activity, and movement patterns over the 72-hour period. His body responded to danger before his conscious mind could process it. Veltrix continued, and his survival instincts operated with a sophistication that our scientists are still trying to understand. An elderly alien in academic robes stood up from the front row and addressed the hall. "If I may," the scientist said, "I would like to request permission to study human survival mechanisms in greater detail, because what we witnessed may require us to revise our entire understanding of evolutionary adaptation." Veltrix agreed to the request, and Danny felt a sinking feeling as he realized his quiet life at the academy was about to become much more complicated after the ceremony. Zin caught up with Danny in the corridor outside the assembly hall. "You are terrifying," Zin said bluntly. "And I mean that as a compliment." Danny laughed and said he was just a normal human who liked to sleep. "That is exactly what makes you terrifying," Zin replied. "You do not even realize what you are capable of." Other cadets passed them in the corridor, and Danny noticed that many of them gave him a wide berth, looking at him with expressions that mixed respect with genuine fear. "They think I am some kind of monster," Danny said quietly. "No," Zin corrected him. "They think you are a predator wearing the disguise of prey, and they are not sure which version is real." Myra Hollins found Danny in the cafeteria an hour later, eating dinner alone because even Zin had needed time to process everything that had happened. Earth Command is very pleased, Myra said, sitting across from him. You have done more for human reputation in 3 days than our diplomats have accomplished in years. Danny nodded and continued eating, not sure how to respond to praise for something he had done while unconscious. They want you to continue at the academy, Myra continued, and complete the full training program, because they believe you could become an important asset for humanity's future. I just want to graduate and go home, Danny admitted. I never asked to be special. Myra smiled and told him that special was not something you asked for. It was something you discovered about yourself that night. Danny returned to his quarters and lay down on his bed, staring at the ceiling just as he had on his first night at the academy. Everything had changed. And nothing had changed. He was still the same person he had always been, with the same desire for peace and quiet and a good night's sleep. But now the galaxy knew what humans were capable of. Even when they were not trying, Danny closed his eyes and let himself drift towards sleep, because tomorrow would bring new challenges and new expectations, and he would need all the rest he could get in her office 3 levels below. Myra Hollins composed her final report to Earth Command. The mission is a success, she wrote. The galaxy now understands that humans are not weak, not primitive, and not to be underestimated. She paused before adding one final observation. They have also learned something that may be even more important, she continued. They have learned to fear a species that is never more dangerous than when it appears completely at ease. The report was sent, and the galaxy would never look at humans the same way again. And in his quarters, Danny Carter slept peacefully, dreaming of home, while his ancient instincts stood guard against any threat that dared to approach.